Hello, good afternoon for those who are watching us right now. Good morning or good night for those who are watching us in the YouTube link of Jornadas de Músicas Mistas da UFRJ. I want to give a warmful welcome to Flo Menezes, Tutschku, Paulo, Zuben, the participants of our second session of the sixth Journeys of Mixed Music of UFRJ. We're gonna have first Flo Menezes speaking, then we have Tutschku, and then we're gonna have a round table with moderation by Paulo Zuben. I would like just to say a few words. The Journeys of Mixed Music of UFRJ are an extension project of the university. It's a project that is open to people outside the university. And since the beginning of the pandemics, we have been making all these activities online. And by the way, I would like just to register here that in Brazil, we are close to 4,100 dead people because of COVID-19. And so the importance of making all these activities, university activities, online. And just finishing this presentation by saying that this extension project is part of the activities of the research group Performance Hoje, Performance Today, that is working on issues about performance in the 21st century. So, big welcome to Flo Menezes again, big welcome to Tutschku. Thank you so much for being here. Flo Menezes from PANaroma, UNESP, Tutschku from HUSEAC-Harvard University, and Paulo Zuben from Santa Marcelina, São Paulo. Please be welcome. Many thanks. And let's start with Flo Menezes and his conference. Flo.
Hello to everybody. Hello, Paulo. Hello, Pedro. A special hello to Hans, my old friend that I knew 97. So practically one quarter of 100 of century that I know personally, Hans, since he was one of the winners of the contest that I organized here in São Paulo, the international contest for electroacoustic music, the CIMESP at that time. And we are close friends, and we are all close friends here. And it's a pleasure for me to talk. What I prepared is more kind of reflections about the possibilities of interaction and how we can think about that. I will share a screen and make a share screen.
I have it already, Flo.
Do you have?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you see?
If I play, you see, no? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Then I prepared a slideshow with some ideas about the multiplication levels of instrumental writing in mixed electroacoustic music. I make, in my poetics, in my music, I make many acousmatic pieces. But I will center on interaction with instruments or voice and the possibilities that are implied in this poetics of interactivity and interaction between both universe of sounds. I have written many mixed electroacoustic pieces since I was 23 years old, with the last movement of my first piece for orchestra, PAN. Been awarded the German DAAD scholarship in '86. DAAD is Deutsche Akademische Austauschdienst. I developed this field in my music in Köln at that time, in Cologne, at the Studio für Elektronische Musik. And since then, I conceived many pieces in this category of electroacoustic music, many of which received international awards. I named some of the pieces, Profile Cartelé for piano and tape at that time. I worked very much in the 80s with analogical tape, what was a really fantastic school for me concerning speculations and necessity of invention of procedures, which is very important to keep in the digital domain. Then it was very, very important for me at that time in Germany, working with tape and cut the tapes and cue the tapes and so on. Parcours de l'Entité is a piece, the first realization of the Studio PANaroma that I founded in '94. Is for flute, metallic percussion, and tape at that time. Then A Dialética da Praia and A Viagem sobre os Grãos. There is a piece and a shorter version of the big piece, A Dialética da Praia, for around 70 percussion instruments and electroacoustic sounds. At that time, still tape. A Viagem sobre os Grãos was premiered at Carnegie Hall in '96. Colores, Fila in Presencia was a requiem for my brother, my very fantastic brother that died suddenly in a car accident. And I wrote this dramatic piece for clarinet percussion and electroacoustic sounds. And then Laboratório, and then I began to develop some techniques and some reflections about electronics in real time. The big project Laboratório was conceived in '91 when I was living in Italy after Germany, and then retook this project in '95, and then finished that with a commission prize of Bolsa Vitae in 2003. Is for large orchestra, 5-voiced choir, soprano solo, and soloists and electronics, pre-composed sounds and live electronics. Then La Novità del Suono for 13 musicians. It's a chamber orchestra. And live electronics, totally live electronics, that won the Gigahertz Prize with Boulez and others, Wolfgang Grimm and others, the first edition of the Gigahertz Prize in 2007. Then Retrato Falado das Paixões was the commission prize of this Gigahertz Prize for 32 voices and live electronics, totally live electronics. And then Donde Solo Las Plantas Suenan, a recent project, 2015, for harp and live electronics that I composed with the Músicas Commission Prize in Morelia, Mexico. And recently, I wrote a very large piece, an opera, with a complex apparatus of electronics in real time and in deferred time. There are many layers that are pre-composed, but also many process of live electronics, and also in really interactivity with the musicians, so that we can classify what happens there as a kind of partition virtuelle, in the sense of Philippe Monoury's conception of retroactivity between what happens in live electronics and what should be happen with the score, with the interpretation, with the live performance. and this is ritos de per passagem, or in English, rites of through passage. It's a jeu de mots, né? Instead of ritos de passagem, né? Rite de passage, it's ritos de per passagem. Né? It's a kind of neutrinopera in two trance acts. And that's a little about my activities in mixed electroacoustic music. But all this can be seen and followed. I will not be rich. I become not rich with my music. The scores and music are all in my site, my website, and I prefer that people have access to that than that 5 or 6 people try to pay for the scores, and then all my scores and recordings and videos and so are in my YouTube channel and on my website. But I want to talk here more about the meaning of mixed electroacoustic music, and just at the end I will give 2 brief examples of my music. I don't speak about my compositions exactly. I speak about the meaning, hoping that these ideas could, in some way, help the young composers to reflect, to make reflections about how to compose and the meaning of the mixed electroacoustic music. So, the beginning of the so-called mixed electroacoustic music takes place in 52 with Músicas su 2 dimensioni by Bruno Maderna, initially for flute, percussion, cymbal, and magnetic tape, but whose final version from 58 is only for flute and tape, electroacoustic sounds. Please, Pedro, play the first example, audio example.
Yes.
It's the very beginning of this masterpiece of Bruno Maderna.
Just one moment, and we're gonna listen to it.
Just a question, Pedro. The audio is integrated in my show. I forgot to put out of my slideshow. Did you hear also to my sounds?
No. We were listening just to your voice.
Just your example, no?
Yeah, we just heard my example now. Yeah.
Okay.
This example, Bruno Maderna, música de duas
I
dimensões.
played and I listened twice. Okay. Well, since then, mixed music poses a fundamental problem which can be formulated in several ways. What's the role of new technologies in relation to traditional musical writing? What can electronic media contribute to the composition? What is the role assumed by electroacoustic resources in musical composition? What acquisitions have we achieved with the new technological means in the process of elaboration of a musical composition? In my view, electroacoustic resources play the role of multiplying instrumental writing, expanding it beyond its possibilities, such as those outlined within the scope of instrumental sound emission. Pierre Boulez once said, quite rightly, that electroacoustic music multiplies musical writing, écriture, but we never asked ourselves how. And he himself didn't provide us with many keys on the issue. Such multiplication occurs, in my opinion, at 3 levels, what I call the 3S system. In Portuguese, o sistema S, né? Because the 3 words begin with ES, and in English with S. Spectral, structural, and spatial. If you try to define spectral, it's transformations of sound, metamorphoses of sound spectra, sound processing. Concerning structural, we can relate it as bouncing, mirroring of figures, constitution of polyphonies, heterophonies, homophonies from the instrumental performance. And last, spatial, field projection of sounds, spatial dynamization and expansion of instrumental or even non-instrumental sound diffusion. While the structural level is dependent on the local structures of each work, the spectral and spatial levels are valid resources for both mixed electroacoustic music and acousmatic music. Electroacoustic music without instruments, conceived to be projected exclusively over a loudspeaker orchestra, in this case. Some treatment or sound processing features, for instance, can be exemplified by the analysis and resynthesis processes based on sonograms. For instance, through the audio schooled program of URCAM, with a paradoxical sound elaborated by Jean-Claude Risset, through the sonogram analysis, time stretching, clipping, and so on. Please play the second example.
We're listening to it.
We are listening to it. Then leave that. The sound is paradoxical because it's always descending, but with higher harmonics that give the impression that the sound becomes higher. And the pulse, the beats, is slowed down, but the micro beats in between gives importance, are enhanced along the sounds, and then it becomes quicker. It's totally paradoxical. It's a kind of thing that's only possible in with the computer. And it's an example of these possibilities of analysis or synthesis and composing inside the sound. But sound spatiality ends up constituting a range of possibilities, not for transformation, but for sound projection. And in Pierre Schaeffer's terms, the relief of sounds. Let us make a brief review of this parameter of the electroacoustic composition. Background, we have Giovanni Gabrieli, Cori Spezzati, the Venetian Cori Spezzati, Claudio Monteverdi afterwards, and then Heinrich Schütz and others, with the spatialization of the choirs in the cathedral. After which there is a kind of sleep of spatiality as an organizational parameter of sounds in musical composition, a long sleep, until the advent of Musique Concrète 48 with Pierre Schaeffer, and the advent of Elektronische Musik in 49 with Herbert Eimert. In January 51, the magnetic tape arrives at the studios, making it possible, according to the words of Luciano Berio, to cut the time with scissors. With magnetic recording, an increase in the forms of sound control is envisaged, including the spatial image of sounds. After the request of Pierre Schaeffer, Jacques Poulain devised a magnetic induction system that projects sounds into space, the so-called Pupitre sonore. This is the first ingenious invention to control the spatial projection of sounds. In 1954, stereophony is implemented in the studios through stereophonic recorders. In 1955-56, Stockhausen realizes his work Gesang der Jünglinge, originally for 5 speakers, later in its definitive version for 4 speakers around the public, establishing the quadraphonic diffusion as a basic and essential form of total space listening. With the electroacoustic music, for the first time in musical history, sound is mobilized, which before was only circumstantial in music. Spatial mobilization. Stockhausen in Gruppen, 55 until 57, for 3 orchestras, or more precisely for 1 big orchestra, or normal orchestra, divided into 3 groups, 3 orchestral groups, makes the same chord move through the different orchestras. The instrumental sound is mobilized without the mobilization of the musicians. Stereo maintenance private correspondence with Stockhausen. I must say I was the first to organize the letters of Stockhausen to Berio in the 50s, written with pencil and so on. When I received a scholarship in the Paul Sacher Stiftung in Basel to make researches about Berio. Berio called personally Paul Sacher and asked for me a scholarship, and then I was finishing my doctor about Berio under the supervision of Henri Pousseur, and then I took 4 months to make my researches on the manuscripts of Berio, and then it was a box with the written letters of Stockhausen to Berio. And in the 50s, with pen and with pencil letters. And in his letters, in Berio's letters, he mentions similar intentions in the conception of Alleluia 1 for orchestra, revised in Alleluia 2. I know that because Stockhausen says in one letter, there are just the letters from Stockhausen to Berio, but according to the subject of the letter, Stockhausen says, curious that you are imagining moving the sound through the space according to the division of instrumental ensembles. I'm thinking on the same idea. Then we see that the thought is parallel between Stockhausen and Berio to split the orchestra. Stockhausen Gruppen, Berio in Alleluia 2, in the revision of Alleluia 1. A similar procedure is used by Berio in Tempi Concertati 58-59 for flute, violin, piano, and 4 instrumental groups located around the audience. In this work, Berio invents the so-called proportional spatial notation in contemporary music. The first piece to make use of that is Sequenza 1 for flute, but in Tempi Concertati, Berio began to invent the proportional notation, although Tempi Concertati was completed one year later. In 1959, Stockhausen discusses the spatial issue of Gesang der Jüngling in his important text, Musik im Raum. In 58-60, again Stockhausen composes Kontakte, and in order to create rotating sounds in space, together with the technicians of the German radio in Cologne and WDR, he conceives the rotary table, Rotiertisch, or Rotationslautsprecher. Xenakis in Eonta, 63-64, for piano, 2 trumpets and 3 trombones, seeks to rescue this crucial aspect, the mobility of sounds, inciting the musicians themselves of metal instruments to mobilize themselves on stage. In Long Tunnel, 67, for orchestra, Ligeti emphasizes the sound depth through instruments of instrumental writing, nuances and small difference between spectra and intensity of the instruments, giving the impression of different sound depth, what was preconized by Varese. Varese had already pointed the way long before in 24 with the composition of Integral for orchestral ensemble, while he was writing the same, for instance, the same notes for trumpet and for oboe. Oboe is nearer to the audience than the trumpet, but according to the spectral and intensity relationships, we have the impressions that the sound of the oboe sounds more distant than the sound of the trumpet, and this kind of depth impression that was simulated already by Varese. Two basic strands of spatial thinking in electroacoustic music. I'm concentrating on spatiality because it is a very, very important aspect and a crucial aspect in interactivity. The concrete or new concrete posture, thinking about the sound to be projected in the theater at the time of the concert, relying on the composer's interpretation in electroacoustic diffusion. And on the other side, the electronic or structural posture, thinking about the sound space in every detail when composing in the studio. Concerning the concrete, the musique concrète, or the acousmatic attitude, the main thing is the spatial projection, while concerning the electronic structural thought is more the spatial structuring. Then we arrive to strategies of sound spatiality. And I will discuss with you some aspects. The electroacoustic diffusion implies the concept of sound projection, the relief, what we call spatialization. These concepts bring us to space levels of electroacoustic musical composition. And then we have two kinds of space levels: an internal composition of the composition itself, and an external of the electroacoustic diffusion of the performance of the piece in the whole. We have a structural on the one side, and on the other side, an interpretative. Concerning the external space, interpretative, we have two attitudes: a preponderantly frontal listening, what is implies a kinematic listening, implies the expression cinema for the ears, cinéma pour l'oreille, the concept of loudspeaker orchestra, different types of speakers, and perception of the presence of these loudspeakers. While on the other side, we have omnispace listening, a kind of theatrical listening, what gives place to the expression of theater for the ears, not cinema for the ears, but théâtre pour les oreilles, sound theater, as for instance the Beast, Birmingham Electroacoustic Sound Theater of John T. Harrison, or my Putsu, o PANaroma UNESP Teatro Sonoro that I founded in 2002 in the Studio PANaroma at the UNESP, with preponderantly equal speakers and suppression of the presence of loudspeakers, concerning more the presence of sounds in space and not exactly the loudspeakers as instruments. The space levels regarding the musical material has also a kind of split of conceptions. In one side, an intrinsic spectral space, and the other side, an extrinsic space are referential. In the side of the intrinsic space, we have a morphological space. In the side of the extrinsic space, we have a typological space. Then we have an introversive space and an extroversive space. And then we begin to think about categories of space. Then we can classify and try to define. For instance, spatial mobility, whether the object is mobile or static. Speed, whether its mobility is slow or fast. Spatial resolution, whether the movement takes place in a continuous and progressive way, or whether, on the contrary, it makes jumps in space. Spatial fill, whether the object's presence is delimited or expanded. Recognition of the movement, if the spatial trajectory is illustrative, figural, or if, on the contrary, it's due to unusual incursions into space. Directions of movement, in the case of recognizable figures, whether the movement is clockwise or counterclockwise. Regarding sound diffusion and propagation, if the object is reverberating, evoking environmental amplitude, or dry, restricting the imagined space. And concerning the relief, whether the sound object is in space reveals protuberances on different planes, supported by dynamic alternations and by their resonant qualities, or if, on the contrary, it proves to be flat. Concerning location of the sound object, if listening detects it at a given point in space, and if there is movement, if the location occurs in a directional way, or if the listening of the object is diffuse, and in the case of movement, adirectional. And last, about depth, if the sound object is close to or distant from us, evoking respectively presence or absence of sound. And then we have parameters related to the spatial behaviors of the spectra in the composition regarding to the sound mobility: mobile, immobile, dynamic, static, speed, fast, slow, accelerated, decelerated. Spatial resolution: continuous, discontinuous, gradual, angular, linear, progressive, pointed by jumps, smooth, least, striated, strié, two expressions taken from Boulez in this case. Spatial fill, angulation, volume, and surface: expanded, delimited, broad, circumscribed, full, rarefied. Recognition of movement: geometric, random, regular, recognizable figures, irregular, new figures, figural, afigural. In direction, clockwise and anti-clockwise. Concerning sound diffusion, propagation, reverberating or dry. And concerning relief of the sound object in space, protruding, flat, porous or flattened, with relief or without relief. Concerning location of the sound object, one-off or diffuse, directional or adirectional, and last but not least, concerning depth, next, distant, present, absent. There are kind of binary oppositions regulating our thinking about that, our thought. Since 2009, I have developed, with the assistance of André Perrota, who now is professor at the Católica in Porto, in Portugal, a program for the composition and control of spatial trajectories of sounds, MPSP, Music Pan Space. First version is this figure, with the possibility of a quadraphonic or octophonic sound design, spatial design. And the second version, which is much more dynamic, because you can define the number of loudspeakers, define exactly where each loudspeaker stays in the space, and write trajectories specifically for this displacement of loudspeakers. In conclusion, I will exemplify with 3 excerpts from my piece Transcriptio. Actually, 2 excerpts for violin and electronics in real time, conceived from Scriptio for solo violins. I will show that. I'm doubt if it will be Pedro.
Yes.
Can you if you listen to the examples, can you close my mic?
Sure. You want me to play? You want me to play?
You to play. Then, if I ask you to play, you close my mic.
Okay.
Because I think we will play also here, and I cannot close myself.
Okay.
Let's remember us the 3 levels, the 3S system: the spectral, the structural, and the spatial. The first example is the spectral example. I explain very quickly Transcriptio. Transcriptio takes the score of Scriptio for violin, and in certain passages of the score, there are some pitches that are colored in the score so that the performer can see and pay attention on that pitch in order, 1, to play exactly the pitch and not a kind of deviation, try to play more exactly as possible, and 2, to take in attention if the sound will be frozen by the live electronics. I have an opening window, a random opening window that can capture or not the pitch when the pitch is played by the violinist, so that if he plays exactly in that time that the window is open, the live electronics freezes the sound and rotates it around the audience. If the violinist perceives that process, he crosses the stage towards another score. This is the Transcriptio, and arriving there plays a kind of window, a window that opens inside the scripture, the musical writing of Scriptio. And this is one of the fenetre, the window 2, when a very small fragment is directionally expanded in space, in the intervallic space, and is spectrally radically transformed, metamorphosed by 7 simultaneous treatments in the live electronics. Please, audio example 2, Pedro, and close my microphone, please. It's a short example.
Okay, here we go. Okay, it just cut the streaming. I don't know why. Flo, yes.
Can you play again?
From the beginning.
From the beginning, because we didn't listen all the example.
Flo, I'm very sorry, it's not working. Let me try one last time. Let's try one last time, otherwise...
And we listen probably mono and slow.
Can you listen now?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, you are listening to my voice?
Yes, now we are.
Okay. It was played by Claudio Cruz, a genial violinist and conductor, Brazilian conductor and violinist, who played all the pieces of a project of DVD, Boulez Plus, with Anthem 2. It's the first surround recording of Anthem 2 by Boulez worldwide, that we produced at Studio PANaroma in accordance with Boulez. Boulez was alive at that time. Then the structural level, the last example, is this score, is the window 1, when there are many bouncings of figures, fragments of gestures, extensions of sound, besides the frequency freezing of one of the colored notes. Please, Pedro, the last example.
Okay.
Okay, and then to finish, I show just the trajectories of the sounds of the last example, that I don't have the sound example, just to show how I work with some trajectories for each of one of the layers of controlled by Max MSP through this patch that music pan space that I named music participation. Thank you very much. That's my contribution for now. Thank you.
Okay, Flo Menezes, thank you very much for your great conference. Let me come back here. So Paulo Zuben is having serious connection problems. He's trying to solve and to be back with us. Let's see how it goes. And well, now I have the pleasure to give a sequence to our second session of the 6th Journeys of Mixed Music of UFRJ with our international guest, Hans Tutschku. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce correctly. You will correct.
No, perfect. That's how it is.
Really? Okay. So glad. And thank you so much, Hans, being here with us. We really appreciate that. Thank you very much for being with us in this edition to share with Flo Menezes your conference also and then the roundtable. So you have the word. If we know you have a recorded video to show to us before the interaction directly with the YouTube chat. Would you like to say something before we put the video?
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. When Flo approached me 2 months ago, if you would like to be part of this, I said immediately yes. And it was a good occasion actually to put a lot of my thoughts together. Now, when we have a limited time during a conference talking about the use of electronics, I prefer to actually produce a video and kind of condense the thoughts into a short moment. So it's a little longer than I initially thought. It's a 40-minute video, but I hope you will enjoy it and it will be a stimulating springboard for our discussion afterwards. So Flo already in his presentation triggered a lot of thoughts and questions. So I'm sure we will have something to discuss. So if you could start, Pedro, if you could start your video screen sharing, and we will be back after about 40 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, I'm doing that right now.
In this video, I would like to talk about interactive music, in particular the relationship between live piano and live electronics. Piano and electronics have been at the heart of my composition since over 20 years now, and I've written a few compositions where the relationship between the piano and the electronics were explored. The first work was Das Play on a Klavier, where I explored the possibility of an ever-changing prepared piano without having any preparations inside. And that composition led then in 2007 to Zellenlinien. As we can see in the beginning of the piece, the timing is very free. We have these big chords followed by fermatas. The electronics follow the pianist with an amplitude detection. And then on the second system, we have this section where the pianist is playing this repeated E and listens to a sequence of chords in the electronics. And in each of these repetition moments, he or she has a certain number of elements how to play that repeated E and can change the order. So there is an interaction between the electronics playing the sequence of the chords. When the first chord gets repeated in the electronics, that's the moment when the pianist is almost playing an echo to the electronics. So I'm inverting the typical relationship of a delay line where we have the instrument first and then the electronics repeat what the instrument microphone has picked up. So here we have a delay line in the other way around. The electronics is playing the chord first, and the pianist is making the answer. In 2010 I composed Irrgärten for 2 pianos and electronics. This was a commission in remembrance of 40 years of the composition of Mantra by Stockhausen. And my work somehow relates to Stockhausen's work, not directly by picking notes or chords, but in its theatralic ambition and in certain ways the form and memory works throughout the composition. In this work I wanted to hide the electronics pretty much as possible, and I worked with iOS devices which were then feeding into speakers, the speakers being inside the piano, I mean inside the resonant chamber of the piano, and therefore the sound should melt as much as possible between the electronics and the live part. After spending 3 months in Japan in 2014, I composed shadow of bells. I was visiting many Japanese temples, gardens, and was fascinated by their view on certain aspects of nature and how the sounds of the bells would reverberate throughout nature and throughout the surroundings of temples. In this composition, the electronics are played back through 2 speakers below the piano, directed towards the soundboard and exciting the soundboard, and then 4 speakers surrounding the audience, creating virtual spaces through large reverb spaces. Virtual Bodies is a work I started a few years ago. It's a work in progress. I have performed it a few times. It is the exploration of the relationship of the musical texture, which has a lot of freedom for improvisation, and then live electronics, which is rendered in real time. So there's no tape, there's no pre-recorded material. Everything depends on the playing of the pianist in that very moment. So in successive performances, I would change the central pitch of the piece. So sometimes I'm playing it around an A, sometimes a B flat, sometimes a B, and the entire electronics follow that pitch and adapt to the current played pitch. Here's a short excerpt. So in these short excerpts, we could already hear that each piece explores a different way of relating the piano to live electronics. What I would like to talk about today is another work I'm composing right now called Sparks for piano and 8-channel electronics, which should be premiered this year, 2021, in July. And while working on it, and obviously not just only working on this piece, but kind of all those pieces over the years have contributed to this thinking and these questions, I'm investigating what actually the interaction is. So we talk about interactive music. So what is the interaction between the instrumental part, the instrumental gesture, the pianist gesture, and the electronics? And I have observed for many years that a lot of interactive music, mine included, is not so much interactive. A lot of what we call interactive music is more reactive, actually. So a musician is playing something, the microphone is picking up the signal, and at some point the electronics, either at that very moment or a few seconds later or a few minutes later, the electronics are reacting to what the musician has done. So I want to show a few explorations, not solutions, they're just pathways where I'm currently am and where I'm researching to find new ways for myself, and hopefully this is of interest. I assume that most of you are familiar with delay lines. The microphone is picking up a signal and plays it back a few seconds later, or longer time spans, like in works by Stockhausen solo, where very long tape loops were used back then. Now we have computers which have a lot of memory and we can make very long delays. What the question then is, what is pertinent to our memory? So how long we can actually keep something in memory to recognize it as a one-to-one copy. And it's very interesting when we start improvising with a delay line. So just microphone in, delay line, and the signal comes back a few seconds later. So there is a very interesting feedback going on when that delay becomes, let's say, longer than 7 or 10 seconds. Because then we have already, as an improvising musician, generated more material, and those 10 seconds ago almost have fallen away. And so being represented with this material becomes something very stimulating. Now here I'm working with something which is a kind of an extension of the idea of a delay line, where I'm recording sounds into a buffer. Assume that this is our buffer. So we can record our waveform into it. And obviously the examples I showed today, they work very well for piano. They would work well for any instrument which has a clear attack. So percussion might be a good example, because I'm relying on attack detection. So I'm looking when we have a new note coming in. So while I'm playing something, I'm detecting if there was a new attack. So let's just assume that these are moments when a new note was played. And I'm writing them into a buffer. What we see here now is the red graph is our waveform, and the white lines are the detected moments when a new note came in. So I have a playback mechanism where those segments in the memory of the computer are now numbered. So I know these are my notes and their beginning and ending times in milliseconds. So I know that this is my first segment, my second segment, etc. I can now change the tempo, and you already hear it. We are actually in kind of an accelerando, retardando mode, where the loop gets slower or faster. I'm not doing time stretch here because we are very sensitive to the attacks of piano notes, so the hammer noise. If I stretch that out, it's not very believable. I'm also not going this through the spectrum. I'm actually doing this only on the waveform, where I'm just figuring out where to start. And then I can say, okay, instead of doing them in sequence, I can just pick random order, or kind of a drunk walk through the notes I've played. If I speed that up quite a bit, So here it becomes almost like a variation engine. And what I want to demonstrate now is how I play this on the piano. I'm just improvising a few notes, and we will have actually two engines running in tandem. So one is recording and detecting the attacks, and then once that has detected a certain number of attacks, in this case I'm asking for 9, so after 9 new notes, this engine will go into playback mode, and then the lower engine will start recording, and they will kind of alternate between. When investigating the relationship between an instrument and the electronics in real time, we need to investigate also what kind of information we can deduct from the microphone signal. So we have seen one example of amplitude. Let's look into pitch now. So what can we actually know about the currently played notes on a piano? Tracking the polyphonic piano is not an easy task. It is not like investigating the sound of a flute or an oboe or the human voice, where we have normally just one single note at a time, and we can look into the spectrum of that particular note and deduct the fundamental frequency. On the piano, things are a little bit more complicated. First of all, we play more than one note, but also the sound itself, when the very moment the hammer strikes the string, the sound itself is very noisy. So a lot of notes in the same register have a lot of similar qualities in the first 20 to 30 milliseconds due to the hammer noise. So we can then delay that analysis and saying, okay, I'm looking a little bit later, and there I'm making an analysis. But then if we want to play something at the very same time together with the note played on the piano, then there's always this time lapse. There's nothing to do about it. We can't look into the future, so we don't know if a note was played unless we hear it, and we have to work around the attack point. Now, obviously, the polyphonic side of a piano is more complicated. So what I've been able to use was tapping into the research of a group at the University of Huddersfield under the guidance of Pierre-Alexandre Tremblay. It's called the FLUCOMA, the Fluid Corpus Manipulation Research. And for the past years, we have been looking into the analysis of sounds, the segmentation of sounds, and also the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence to do some of this. So I can't go obviously into all the details, but for those who are interested, you can continue the research and read about it. What I'm talking about now is the so-called NMF, the nonlinear matrix factorization. And I've used this to train a model. So let's imagine that we have a piano here. I mean, this is a physical piano, but it sounds like a real piano. And I'm training a neural network repeatedly different incarnations, let's say, of an A4, played with different dynamics, played on different types of pianos, on a Steinway, of an upright piano, on a Bösendorfer, played with different tuning systems, diapason tunings, 440, 442, etc. And I'll present this neural network with all these different versions of an A4 and say, learn that this is an A4. And what we obtain is at the end kind of a database. So here we have all the analyzed notes of the piano, and you could think of it that each of these spectra we see here now are kind of the fingerprint, the acoustic fingerprint for that particular note. So obviously this training has been offline, and I'm not training the very low octave of the piano because then I would need a much higher FFT size, and that incorporates even longer delays. So what I'm working with is in total 73 notes from C2 to the highest note of the piano. And what this gives me at the end is a tracking patch. So I get my microphone in here, and in the tracking I'm using then an NMF matching object from that research group. I'm telling it that we have 73 components, and what that object gives me is a list for these 73 components with their likelihood that this note is part of the total spectrum. So if I play just one note, it's pretty likely that that particular pitch is the highest candidate. If I'm playing more than one pitch, then due to overtones and overlap of some spectra, there might be more than just that one single note being played. I have a few ideas even to increase or to improve this model, but for now it is what it is. It is certainly not ideal. It's not like playing on a MIDI piano, but what I'm after is a piano, a technology which only relies on the microphone. So hopefully this can then be played in different concert halls with different pianos, but not relying on the technical requirement of a MIDI piano, a grand piano with MIDI function. So after getting this list of all the activations, the likelihoods that a certain pitch was there, I'm doing all kinds of filtering to convert them into individual notes. So I have then these 73 note filters here, and each of them is looking at that particular activation channel. And if the activation is high enough, it generates a MIDI note. So what we have here is now the microphone coming in, and I'm sending this currently to a little playback patch which uses Serge Lemouton's sampler. So it's a sampler within Max. So I've loaded samples of the piano. So that would be just our A4. And what I can do now is I'm playing some notes on the piano, and we will trigger at the same time the notes from this sampler. In the next examples, I will do some symbolic note transformations. I'm not transforming the sound of the piano. I am detecting the piano pitch through this module I just explained, and then I'm going into symbolic representation. The first example will be the generation of chords with particular qualities taken or built of the detected pitch. An extension of that is what I call clouds. So it is actually little groups of notes. The next example is what I call a stubborn delay. So it detects a pitch and then repeats that note in an irregular rhythm. The next example is what we call agogic. So this is based on a library which extends the Bach library by Daniel Gysi and Andrea Agostini. The library is called Cage, and it's kind of a higher level musical library based on Bach. Here we have functions like agogic, so we can record a musical figure and then repeat it with increasing or decreasing temporal evolution. And this is a time warp where a melody is recorded and then the order and duration of notes is constantly reorganized. I'm putting all of those modules on, but as you will see, they have all their own individual timer and come in and out, and at some point overlap and generate something I can't fully anticipate. So that is actually then again this question of interaction. So while I'm playing some music material and I hear that transformed back, I get inspired to generate responses to what the computer is proposing. The next example shows another playback patch, not so dissimilar from a typical sampler. So I've loaded many sounds from prepared piano, and I just want to show a little bit the playback engine before I'm connecting it to the real piano. So let's say we have just a pretty standard playback of a scratch note. So this is a scratch on the strings. And then I have a few playback modes, so I can play this backwards, no surprise. It starts from the tail and goes to the beginning. And then I have a mode where I'm generating loop points on the fly, so the loop will actually never repeat. And it makes a loop back and forth between, the direction is changing, so you hear sometimes the glissando going up, sometimes down. And if I play polyphonically, then each voice has its own looping. In this mode, I'm respecting the note on and note off. So if I play a note and then release the note on and off are respected, but I can also put it into a mode where I'm only triggering the note and then I'm generating some duration here artificially. Let's say I'm making a note which is now 5 seconds long, and over that duration it will loop. And then I can also induce an additional glissando. So I can say you start with no glissando at the beginning and you have to gliss up a certain amount, and the duration of the glissando, let's make it 5 seconds also. So now we started at the original pitch and then it glides up. Let's take a different sound. I recorded sounds with a piece of rubber on the lower strings. It makes this very high-pitched resonant sound. So this would be the original sound. No glissando. So if I combine that with the piano, I will now generate a longer note. So let's say something between 5 and 10 seconds, and then each note can either gliss down for a certain amount or gliss up for a certain amount, and the glissando can also between 5 and 10 seconds. And The last version I want to show, or the last option here I have, is that if I'm choosing more than one sound, let's say I'm taking some preparation with rubber, that would sound originally like this, and then I'm choosing a second sound. Let's turn off the it can now aleatorically choose which sound to take. So if I'm making a long list here, then each new node can pick any of those samples. In this example, I will now combine these concepts. We have two instances of the sample player. The upper one is loaded with 4 longer sounds, so bowed sounds and this rubber sound I showed earlier. So if I just play this one, let's just trigger one sample. So we hear these different types of sounds, and each of them can have a very slight glissando. This sampler receives its pitch directly from the pitch tracker. And the second instance is loaded with very short sounds. But obviously, because those are prepared piano sounds, we don't always get the same pitch. So we get kind of a pitch center, but not necessarily the exact pitch. And this sampler is not receiving the pitch directly from the pitch tracker. The pitch tracker is sending the pitch first into this real-time module here, and I'm using the stubborn delay. So I'm detecting a pitch and generate this series of the same pitch with a irregular rhythm, which then sends its signal back, the information back to the second sampler. So if I'm playing a note here, you're getting this cloud of ever-changing, randomly picked notes from this collection here. So let's combine both and play some notes on the piano. So as one could hear, I'm passing the microphone signal through a gate. So I'm only taking sounds louder than a certain dynamic here, in this case minus 65 dB. So I can play pianissimo notes on the piano and they're not getting into the detection and therefore not triggering, not each note is then triggering a new sound from those samplers. To finish with the individual sound examples, I want to show one more module and combine it with what we just saw before, as particularly the playback of these sampled sound files doesn't always match up with the sound of the real piano in the room. I'm overlaying many of the treatments with some treatment of the real sound, of the real microphone sound of the piano. So here is now an audio version of this stubborn delay. So this result kind of inspired me to program something similar, but now based on the audio. So I'm detecting when a sound had been played and then I'm repeating it like with a delay line. So I could actually pretty much mimic a delay line here. So let's say, okay, I want 10 repetitions. Now what you hear, there's also already in ritardando, accelerando going on. You also hear that there's a filter, so I'm not fading the sound out with its amplitude, I'm fading it away through a filter. And then I can create more than one voice. Now right now they have all their same rhythm, but if I dissociate these voices, and each voice can have their own rhythm and give them a slight transposition so they can also glide up or down, and each of them can have a different number of repetitions. So there we hear the clear color of that particular piano, and now I will combine it with the overlay of the sampler. To conclude, I would like to talk a moment about notation for the upcoming work Sparks for piano and HN electronics. I'm experimenting with ways how to notate the musical fabric. So on the left side would be a standard notation, and the pianist would be partially busy in counting and trying to match those tempi and still listening to the electronics. The right side is a proportional notation containing exactly the same musical content, and the timing would be up to the pianist. There could be moments where he or she takes more or less time depending on what the electronics are rendering. Now, as the electronics are recalculated during the performance every time anew, and there's no fixed media, I'm searching for this space, for this interpretation space for the pianist to be in dialogue, to be in interaction with that musical fabric. So depending on how long a certain musical texture from the computer lasts, or how strong is the resonance, or all these different aspects of the electronics, how polyphonic the result is, they depend to a good degree on the intensity and the pitches the pianist is playing, but also there is a lot of room to regenerate with the exact same musical input from the pianist, something slightly different. So I'm interested in exploring these slight differences and to give the pianist a way to play, to interact with it. I've explored in other works the possibility of giving musical material to the musicians. This is an example from codification memory for soprano, percussion, 9 instruments and electronics. And what we see here are these brackets where musicians are giving precise musical material, but the order of the material is free. And then there's an overarching time frame within which everybody's performing these actions, very often with overarching dynamic profiles over the duration of this event. And then it basculates back into normal metered notation. So these kind of two modes of dealing with time are interesting to me. The last musical example is this exact passage played freely while listening to the electronics, which for this video have been rendered into a stereo file and normally have a lot of spatial movement and spatial relationships.
So this gave kind of an overview of what I've been doing over the past couple of years. I noticed that during the streaming, unfortunately, the sound came across as a mono stream. So if for some of the examples where you really want to hear the space and also the separation between the real piano and the kind of detected piano, those videos are on Vimeo and also on YouTube, so you can refer to the original files. Thank you.
Okay, Hans, thank you very much for this great presentation on your music for piano and electronics. And well, I must say, Paulo Zuben is very sorry, but he had a problem. He's out of energy. He doesn't have energy. He doesn't have internet to be with us on this discussion in the end of your presentation. And he's very sorry. I'm transmitting his message. But Paulo, Jornadas de Músicas Mistas, doors are open for next time, for next edition. So I'm sure we're going to find another occasion for you to participate with us. Thank you very much, Paulo. And we are also sorry for that inconvenience, but this happens, no problem. So Flo Menezes and Hans, we have a few minutes to discuss. I would like first of all to put some comments that we have on YouTube. Many people are interacting here. This was already a few minutes ago. You can write your questions to Hans and to Flo Menezes in the YouTube chat, so people are congratulating. Sorry. Luis Alvin, she has a question about the problem of space in the pandemic. So please, Luisa, you can write your question. Let's see here.
All have the problem. All have the problem in the pandemic.
Oh, yes, we all have questions. How can the spatial level function in the pandemic as we are closed at home and we don't have the co-presence of performers, apparatus, and spectators? How do you see that? How can we deal with this loss? Flo Menezes and Hans.
May I talk firstly, or you, Hans?
Sure.
That's very difficult. I think the greatest problem now is how to deal with the Brazilian government in the pandemic. This is the first thing to do, to put aside what's happening in Brazil and change the politics. If we achieve this wonderful situation of a kind of rebellion in the sense of putting aside Bolsonaro and all the staffs of government, then we can think about specialty. But concretely saying about the question, it's very difficult to deal with space with just headphones. A kind of palliative solution is the binaural listening. what can simulate very well the spatiality of sounds, but nothing will substitute the presence of a loudspeaker orchestra with the system of very well-placed, fantastic loudspeakers and the intersubjectivity of the concert hall, listening to music together with other people. Even in silence, we feel the change between the people. And the sound space concerning is more precisely the question of spatiality. We need space, we need distance to really project the sounds, project and perceive all the details of movements in space. It's we cannot substitute. We can hope that we get aside this pandemic. In our case, we must have at first a political change to improve that and have some perspectives of improvement, and then retake our spaces in the universities and the concert halls with the loudspeaker orchestras and make the presence there.
Thank you, Flo. Hans?
Yeah, I also think that kind of looking at the pandemic kind of from, let's say, zoomed out. So probably this Earth, our entire ecosystem on this planet needed a break from humanity. I mean, we have been abusing the world so much over the past 30, 40 years that that was Earth's reaction to put a pause button on our abuse, I guess. And it is also a time, besides all the personal grief and losing friends, people, and family members, it is also a moment of reflection. It's a moment of reflection in our lives in general, but also on our creative potentials, on our tools we use, on our interaction with the audience as players, as listeners. And so how we can deal with this loss? Well, I would not call it a loss yet. You know, we all have not lost hope that once the Earth has moved beyond this current situation, we will go back to, at least partially, to activities we have practiced before. And then over time, we will integrate it and learn how to live with this new normal. For me, it has been really a year of rethinking a lot of things, a lot of relationships with my compositions, with what I want to tell the audience. And what Flo Menezes just mentioned, binaural listening is certainly a helper. But, you know, we have been in this comparison between reality and receiving something through a media since over 100 years. I mean, since we have recorded audio, and we don't always go to the concert hall, but we listen to CD recordings, the radio, the TV, etc. So we have an experience with mediated performance. And the current way of listening to things through headphones is another way, probably not our voluntary, but it is the reality of another mediated listening situation. So we will get out of this, and we will have learned something about our listening, about our composition, and we'll see where this leads us in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, sure. I think Luisa, she just made a last comment here. Yes, I totally agree. And this situation will depend on the investment of the public in this acoustic condition. I myself don't have any condition. Okay, Luisa, thank you. Luisa will be moderating the closing concert of the 6th Journeys of Mixed Music with UFRJ on Friday. And it's a concert only with women composers. Okay, so Flo and Hans, would you like to put something on the table for us to discuss or ask one question to the other?
Yeah, I mean, I really like your presentation, Flo. A very good and very condensed kind of overview, not only on the technologies. It's always so easy to talk about technologies, but about the aesthetical and the artistic implications of the evolution of technology. I'm interested. I mean, I know that you have been writing a lot, you have studied, you have published. how is the historicity, how is the kind of importance of history informing your own compositional work?
How is the importance of the history in my work?
Mm-hmm. How is the importance and the analysis of history, I mean, the history of the last 40, 50 years influencing your own writing? You're thinking about interactive music, you're thinking about the integration of electronics.
The whole time, I think it's very important to have clear the ideas that were exposed and condensed through the great masters of the past. And in the sense of our music in the electroacoustic field, we cannot misregard what Barrio, Boulez, Stockhausen made in the sense of structural thinking on the one side, and on the other side, what the acousmatic school made concerning this opening of listening and pay attention of fature, of the sound qualities and typological and morphological developments of sound and sound structures. I think they are complementary. They are a word of complementarity between both schools. I tried to present a kind of table of binary oppositions, because all the thinking are all the ways of thinking are organized more or less as binary oppositions, as in the language, the opposition between consonants and vowels, and all the stratification levels of language, all are more or less organized upon binary oppositions. But when we see the binary oppositions, my way of thinking was always a syncretic one. That's also the reason why I named the studio PANaroma, because PANaroma is a word invented by James Joyce in Finnegan's Wake that means pan aroma, of all things. In one side, it seems to be a Tupi-Guarani word, PANaroma. On the other side, it was used by the concrete poets in Brazil, the very avant-gardist poets, when discussing and translating Joyce in an historical book, Panorama do Finnegan's Wake, here by the brothers De Campos and Décio Pinhatari. And then we have a cross of influences that makes a kind of, more or less explains what I think, trying to think about and to make the way how I teach music, how I teach composition, in the sense that we cannot, we may not have a kind of how is the name, dichotomic thing, that we exclude one side in order to have another. One thing that I feel a very good concordance with the music of Hans, with the personality of Hans, is that we both make acousmatic music and mixed music. We don't exclude the word of acousmatics because we love instruments, and we don't exclude instruments because we love acousmatics.
Could we say you are just working with sounds, any kind, any sort of sounds?
Yeah, more than sounds, I think ways of escrituras, ways of writing, of conception, that are in both places, and it's possible to use and make a kind of syncretism, not an irresponsible anthropophagy, as a kind of everything is okay. No, not in this way, but in the sense that we can really think about the things and see how our language can situate aspects of the acousmatics and interactive music and make together a kind of synthesis.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I have one more follow-up question for
Sure.
Flo. Very specific, because this is something which has been kind of at the core of my thinking for many, many years. When we look into works with tape from many good composers, you can take conductor, you can take arias, anything where we have a fixed media component. The composer put a lot of thoughts into the temporal relationships between the live part, the instrumental part, and the electronic part. And I'm referring now to your middle of the three S's, the structural relationships between the instrumental part and the electronics. And there, many composers have used the way of anticipating music material in the electronics first, which then later is picked up in the live part, etc. When we look now into live electronics, pretty much anything in the late 80s, early 90s, where the fascination by the composer to be able to use a microphone and do everything in real time started to generate what I call kind of temporal one-way. So we have first the sound from the microphone and then whatever the electronics is doing. And there is very little structural invention going on in the first couple of years of live electronics, where that model is questioned. Where musical material can actually come back from the electronics or can be introduced by the electronics first. So for me, it was very important early on to break with that model and not saying live electronics is kind of one way where everything has to be live, and tape composition is another way where everything is pre-prepared. So I'm always kind of mixing the two strands with pre-prepared musical material and then the live processing. So I was wondering how you experienced this change. I mean, you, in your list of works, you said, okay, this was still tape, this was still tape, this was still tape. And then you said, this was now live electronics. So what are the two, because you lived this transition as I did, what are the two media, so the totally prepared tape and then the possibility of live electronics? What did that change in your structural thinking of the relationships between the live instrumental part and the electronics?
I agree with you totally in trying to avoid a kind of one-way relationship where we have the electronics always responding to the performance as a kind of embellishment of echoes or a kind of response to the performance. I think it's very important to try with the new means what was very difficult in earlier times, but now we have the possibility through the research of today of many years already through MaxMSP and other possibilities, to increase the possibility of a real interaction, in the sense that what happens in the performance or what happens in the electronics can influence both sides of sonorities. In the opera, for instance, I tried in a given scene through a real-time analysis of a metal percussion sounds, of many metallic percussion sounds. Through this analysis, through a kind of descriptor that analyzes the most important components, that which analysis passes through a kind of re-elaborations in the patch, in the sense that I transpose the four lower sounds of this analysis in order to get a larger spectrum. And this analysis generates a kind of score for 7 soloists in the middle of the audience that play the chord resulting from the analysis in real time. And there is also a kind of interpolation between this sound quality and the transposition I made, conserving a higher part of the spectrum, but transposing and enlarging the spectrum towards the low frequencies. so that it comes near to my main entity, harmonic entity that governs all the instrumental writing in the orchestra, for instance. So we have a kind of interactivity that is active, that is really unstable. Né? That's the reason I mentioned the conception that I feel very interesting of Philippe Manoury of partition virtuelle. That's a kind of possibility of using live electronics not only in a one-way, as a one-way transformation or rebounding of sounds, but also installing a kind of instability of the performance and of the score itself. Because in my case, I made a kind of generation of chords that are played by the soloists.
Flo, this means that the interaction is all the time composed, all the time interpreted and changed by this interaction, by this open form of composing and interacting with the materials.
In this passage of the opera, I must say that there are interactive pieces of the old electroacoustic music with tape which function wonderfully. At least the result is the most important thing, the thing that we listen as the poetical, musical formulations. And we can simulate a kind of instability even with tape. It's possible. But of course, with the new possibilities of live electronics, Hans showed an amount of that possibilities. We can produce a kind of retroactive, more than interactivity, retroactivity between both players.
Sure.
Well, you are searching that too, Hans, the whole time in your music.
Yeah, of course.
We are almost running out of time. Do we have time for one question from Rafael Villani? So I'd like to ask Mr. Tutschku a simple question about the usage of the nonlinear matrix factorization tools he showed in his out of this world impressive Max patch.
Well, I can obviously explain how I did the training of this model in much more detail, and there will be a follow-up video on that. That was kind of extending a little bit the subject of today. I contributed to a conference in February at the University of Huddersfield where I explained that model in its incarnation back then, and I'm still, as I mentioned in the video today, I'm still trying to improve it. Essentially, what we can think of is there is a direct relationship between the spectral resolution. How fine-grained can we say something about the frequency currently played, and that is related to the FFT size. So how big do we make our spectral analysis? And in order to detect the low pitches on the piano, we need quite a big FFT. So I'm working with an FFT of 4096, and that induces quite a big of a delay. So we heard that in this one example. But I don't need that precision in the higher octaves. So I will make now a new model where I'm breaking up the octaves of the piano, and I will work with smaller FFT size for the higher pitches and medium FFT for the middle and the low with the large FFT. So to minimize the delay in the higher register. I think this will take me another month to get that finalized, and I will make a new video on that. And so, I mean, you can just contact me directly. I can share more information if you're interested.
Okay. Thank you so much, Hans Tutschku, Flo Menezes. It was a great session of the sixth Journeys of Mixed Music, And really thank you very much for this great session. And I invite you all to keep on watching the next sessions and the closing concert of the sixth Journeys of Mixed Music UFRJ. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado. Danke schön.
It was a pleasure for me to be in the event, and especially to be with Hans, who's a brother of mine since practically 25 years. I have some brotherhood in the international milieu, and Hans is surely one of. He was in my home many times. I was in his home many times. I was in Harvard twice already. He was in Studio PANaroma as guest composer. As a great head in my perspectives of musical thinking and life. Also, no, it was a pleasure for me.
Yeah, same here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And Flo, I mean, I think we have a lot of things to talk about.
Yeah,
sure.
That's great. Thank
you.
Thanks,
bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.